Anticipation is building ahead of a high-stakes U.S.-Russia summit in Alaska. In just a few hours' time, U.S. President Donald Trump will sit across from Russian leader Vladimir Putin at a U.S. air base, trying to find a way out of the war in Ukraine. Ahead of Putin's arrival, pro-Ukraine protesters took to the streets of Anchorage, where the talks are being held. Many voiced anger that Alaska is hosting the Russian president, who has a standing international arrest warrant for alleged war crimes. Others criticized the fact that Ukraine itself is not part of these negotiations. DW spoke with some of the locals in Anchorage, both for and against the summit.
I think it's great. I think it's unprecedented what they're doing right now. And, you know, Putin coming over, it's great.
We don't know what they're up to. And we're concerned, what are they really doing? They're certainly not negotiating for peace on behalf of the Ukraine. And we want to support the Ukraine people.
As an American, I feel safer with him meeting with the head of Russia on American soil versus somewhere else.
I feel like it is an affront to our democracy. It's an affront to the Ukrainian democracy. It is an affront to our state to have a war criminal in our state, a man that is actually wanted. Why is he on our soil? Why is he on our soil?
For more now, we can speak with Nikolai Petrov. He's a political scientist and head of analysis of transformational processes at the New Eurasian Strategies Center. Thanks for being with us. Now, Donald Trump has suggested that Vladimir Putin is ready to make peace, but the Kremlin says it's unlikely any deal will be signed in Alaska. What do you think will come out of this meeting?
Well, I think the very fact that decision to meet there came all of a sudden after presidential Waitkov visited the Kremlin means that there is at least, a kind of agreement reached between both President Trump and President Putin, which can let President Trump to demonstrate effectiveness of his peaceful efforts. Whether this is a real step towards the end of the war, or just a demonstration like to stop fighting in the air and in the water, but to keep fighting on the ground, nobody knows. But I'm sure that President Trump will declare certain fruitful results of his efforts.
As Donald Trump likes to say, anything can happen. Earlier, we spoke to a Ukrainian MP who said Russia still aims to occupy all of Ukraine and then move on to the Baltic states. That's one fear that is out there. Is that a plausible assessment, in your opinion?
Well, I think there should be clear understanding that Russia under Putin will not stop confrontation with the West, so it can stop somehow the war in Ukraine or move to the war in a different shape. But so far we see, preparations for long-time confrontation with the West. And until the West, I mean European countries, will be not as mighty in military sense to prevent any moves of Russia in their direction, they cannot feel being safe and secure.
Russia's been stepping up its attacks on Ukraine ahead of the talks. Is that adding credibility to Vladimir Putin's claim that Russia is actually winning this war?
I think that unfortunately there are a lot of indicators that Ukraine cannot win the war of attrition against much bigger and mighty country, if especially American military assistance will stop or will become not that big. And we do see certain moves of Russian troops towards Ukrainian territory. And if only not to change the situation in a radical way, it's not about giving some more weapons for a short while, but it's about active direct participation in this war on the side of Ukraine. We cannot wait for any positive development in military sense for Ukraine.
What about the domestic situation in Russia? How does that factor into this? Is Putin under any real pressure at home to make a deal, or would he risk looking weak if he settles for anything less than the total subjugation of Ukraine?
I think that unlike President Zelenskyy, who sees changing, public attitude toward negotiations and results of the war, President Putin can feel calm. There are no signs of Russian public in general to feel, very much uncomfortable with what's going on and to push Russian authorities in direction of ending the war. When being asked whether they are in favor of negotiations, they do answer that yes, they are. But if to ask them conditions on which the war can end, it's entirely those conditions formulated by Putin.
Now, Russia has suffered massive casualties in this war, by all accounts. It's heavily sanctioned already, and it now faces the prospect of punitive secondary tariffs by the U.S. if it doesn't agree to a ceasefire. Given all that, what's your assessment of Russia's capacity to continue fighting?
Not long ago, we did make the report where we tried to analyze Russia's capacities to continue the war in very different fields, in economy, in terms of military might, in terms of public opinion and everything else. And the final conclusion was that Putin can continue the war in its present shape for about a year without facing any serious troubles. What will happen next? Nobody knows. And Russian economy is doing not that well this year, but it doesn't prevent Putin from continuing the war in near future.
Nikolai, thank you very much for talking with us today. That was political scientist Nikolai Petrov.
My pleasure.
Now, let's get the view from Brussels on these talks. We're joined now by our correspondent, Anchal Vohra. Anchal, European leaders are excluded from the Alaska talks, but they've been trying to influence Trump's negotiating position ahead of the summit. Are they being heard by Donald Trump?
There's a sense here that they may have been heard in those in that video call that they held with the president of the U.S. They think that they have managed to convince him on a couple of important fronts. They think that they've gotten assurance from Donald Trump to agree to a ceasefire first. They want Trump to push Putin to agree to a ceasefire first. And according to reports in the U.S. press, President Trump also apparently believes that that would be a show of goodwill on Russia's part. They also think that they can get the U.S. around to offering some sort of security guarantee later. It may not be Ukraine's entry in NATO, but it could be something else. Now, the Europeans have been trying to put together what they call a coalition of willing to send troops to Ukraine whenever a peace deal is reached. So there's somebody on the ground, boots on the ground, to monitor any such agreement. And for that, they desperately need American air cover. There's no confirmation from the U.S. whether this would happen or not, but they think that maybe the U.S. could agree to some sort of security guarantee and definitely to include Zelenskyy, Ukrainian president, in any kind of future negotiations.
Now, President Trump has suggested that Ukraine will have to make territorial concessions as part of any peace deal with Russia. What do Ukraine's European allies think about that?
Well, you know, they've always said it's Ukraine's decision, it's Ukraine's prerogative, and Ukraine gets to decide, and we will back Ukrainian position. However, even when we speak to the Ukrainians, there's a sense of, look, even if we sit down and talk to Putin about any kind of territorial swap, how is that going to play out in future? Because they believe that the Russian president will not stop with Donbass. They believe that unless there are proper security guarantees in place, that the Russian army will actually invade them again for more territory. So the Europeans back that assessment. However, in some quarters, for instance, the NATO chief, Mark Rutte, has said, perhaps we don't need to legally recognize territories that are de facto under Russian control, but de facto recognize them as occupied territories and later have a proper discussion about the legality of it all, which could at least freeze the conflict and stop the killings.
Anchal, thank you very much. That was our correspondent, Anchal Vohra, in Brussels.
Many questions being asked. In the meantime, Donald Trump has struck an optimistic note ahead of Friday's summit, claiming that Putin is ready to make a deal on Ukraine. He says a possible future meeting with the leaders of Russia and Ukraine will be more important than the summit in Alaska.
I think it's going to be a good meeting, but the more important meeting will be the second meeting that we're having. We're going to have a meeting with President Putin, President Zelenskyy, myself, and maybe we'll bring some of the European leaders along, maybe not. I don't know that it's going to be very important. We're going to see what happens. And I think President Putin will make peace. I think President Zelenskyy will make peace. We'll see if they can get along. And if they can, it'll be great.
We can now speak to Oleksiy Goncharenko, who's a member of the Ukrainian Parliament. Welcome to DW. How do you view these upcoming talks? Do you see a genuine chance for lasting peace?
Hello. Yes, I do. I mean, I have a lot of fears and concerns too, but also I have a lot of hopes. And I think this mood is widely spread between Ukrainians. So it's mixed feelings, but we have hope, and we wish President Trump today courage, luck, and if he will be strong enough, he can lead us to peace. If not, if he will lose to Putin, I think that would be a very sad moment, not just for Ukraine, but for the whole world, including the United States.
You have hope, mixed feelings, and yet you say Russia does not want to end this war. What does Russia want, in your opinion?
Russia wants to continue the war. Russia wants to occupy the whole Ukraine, and after this to occupy Baltic states, and after this to go ahead. And I just will remind you that 35 years ago, Russia controlled half of Germany. And that is ultimate goal of Putin. I believe he will never achieve this, but today is a very important day and very important moment, because we will understand, does Europe can count on Donald Trump and on the United States of America? Can Ukraine count on the United States of America? Is the United States a partner we can rely on? This is a very important moment.
What makes you think that the U.S. president can be an effective mediator? He, of course, sees himself as a master deal maker, but Vladimir Putin, we have to bear in mind, is also a master manipulator.
Yes, Putin is a KGB officer, and we all understand what they can do and what they can't do. He will try to play games with Trump, but all these games are very simple and primitive. So if Trump will be strong enough, if Trump is not going to follow this false track which Putin will try to show him, Trump absolutely can push Putin to go to a negotiation table. The best scenario would be the ceasefire, immediate ceasefire after this meeting, which is possible. And that's something which President Trump was saying he will achieve in 24 hours. I understand that 24 hours was probably rhetoric, but now it's time. It's more than half a year he is in the office, and Ukraine agreed on the unconditional ceasefire in March. So there is only one obstacle, Vladimir Putin. And today Trump is meeting him personally.
He's meeting him personally. You're optimistic. There are a lot of ifs, but I want to know from you, how do you personally feel when you hear the U.S. president, the person who you hope will be negotiating on your behalf today, talking about some land swapping being part of a future deal?
We don't know exactly what does he mean. By the way, it's air raid alert, which it may be, I don't know, do you hear it or not, but it shows that the war continues, unfortunately, while this summit is under preparation. Speaking about land swaps, I can tell you that we don't know exactly what President Trump means. Because, for example, there is a very important swap which I think should happen. Russia today controls the largest in Europe nuclear power plant. Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And it will be much better for the whole world, not just for Ukraine, but by the way, to Russia also, but to the whole continent and the world, if Ukraine will control this nuclear power plant, because it's connected with Ukrainian power grid system. And this swap, so if Russians will leave at least this part of territory and will give back control of this nuclear power plant to Ukraine, that is something which I think should be discussed and which would be for benefit of everybody.
Please let us know if you need to take shelter, if there's an air raid alert in Kyiv right now. We don't have much time, but I do want to know what the red lines are for Ukraine here. If Donald Trump were to come back with a deal, when would Ukraine say, no, we're not buying into this?
Red lines, and I hope that Zelenskyy was clear about these red lines on Wednesday when he, together with Chancellor Merz and other European leaders, were speaking with President Trump. And these red lines are, first, non-recognition of Ukrainian territories to be Russian. Yes, Russia, we are moving to the freezing of the conflict, where Russia will continue to control part of our territories, but their status should be illegally occupied, because these are Ukrainian territories. And sooner or later, we will regain control over them when Russian empire will fall apart again. Second thing is no limitation of Ukrainian sovereignty, meaning that Ukraine makes its own sovereign choices about what army to have, what alliances to join. And three is some kind of security guarantees, not from Russia, it's clear. Russia, we don't believe them, but from our American and European allies.
That'll be a tough sell to Vladimir Putin. That was Ukrainian MP Oleksiy Goncharenko. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Let's take a closer look and bring in our correspondents, Lisa Louie and Nimisha Jaiswal. Nimisha is reporting from Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, and Lisa is covering Russia from Riga, as DW is, as you know, banned from reporting from Russia. Lisa, let's start with you. Trump is suggesting there that the meeting in Alaska could pave the way for a meeting between Zelenskyy and Putin. How likely is that outcome?
Well, Europe and Ukraine are obviously hoping for such a meeting further down the road. But when you look at the Russian side, it looks less likely for two main reasons. First of all, Kremlin-friendly commentators and newspapers have been repeating that line that President Zelenskyy of Ukraine, according to them, is not a legitimate leader. Remember that Vladimir Putin, one of the reasons for which he started the invasion of Ukraine was for regime change. He wants a pro-Kremlin regime in Ukraine. That's something that obviously Ukraine is refusing. And the second reason is that Russia seems to feel that it has the upper hand on the ground right now. There is what seems to be a summer offensive going on. So Russia is trying to push forward. And, remember also that Russia would like to incorporate 4 regions of Ukraine into Russia. It has enshrined that into the Russian constitution. That, the Donbass, Luhansk and Donetsk, and also Zaporizhzhia and Kherson further down south are part of Russia according to the Kremlin. They want to push forward towards that goal. Obviously, the Ukrainians don't agree with that. But those are indications that Vladimir Putin might not be ready to sit down with President Zelenskyy in the near future.
Nimisha, Ukraine and its European allies have been excluded from the talks. And the saying goes, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Is that the sense Ukrainians have, or is there some cautious optimism?
Well, you're right, Nicole. There's definitely a lot of concern here. And just the fact that the Russian president is sitting down with his American counterpart on American soil is already seen as a PR win for him. And the absence of Zelenskyy is, of course, a massive thorn on the side. A lot of concern that no decisions about Ukraine's future can be made without Ukraine at the table. Zelenskyy has already called any decisions reached at this meeting dead decisions. And even though he tries very hard to keep Trump on side, he did express frustration at the mention of land swaps earlier this week by President Trump. He said that it's not private property that he can just give away. But after a remote conversation with European leaders and Zelenskyy and Trump earlier this week, they did come out of that meeting a bit more optimistic. They did say that Trump was willing to keep focused on their agenda, to focus on a ceasefire and eventually a trilateral meeting.
Lisa, Nimisha said it there, whatever the outcome, this is being framed as a win for Putin. How have Russian media been reporting on the summit?
Russian media seem to agree on that in that respect. They're also saying this is already a victory for Russia, for Vladimir Putin. According to them, it means Russia is back on the world stage. Just remember that Vladimir Putin is also someone who seems to be personally offended by the fall of the USSR in the early 1990s. And one of his aims seems to be to re-establish Russia on the world stage as a global superpower. And this meeting with President Trump seems to be one step towards that goal. And another thing that is being repeated by pro-Kremlin commentators and the newspapers in Russia is that they're kind of complaining that Ukraine and Europe are meddling in these peace talks, although obviously, it is about something that is happening in the very heart of Europe, in Ukraine, that is.
Nimisha, it's been almost 3.5 years since Russia launched its full-scale invasion into Ukraine. How much appetite is there in the country for a peace deal?
Well, Nicole, there's definitely a lot of appetite for peace because Ukrainians are exhausted after 3.5 years of constant air raid alerts, their families being mobilized and many, many losses. Just to give you a comparison, last month in July, 6,000 Russian drones were sent over to Ukraine compared to 400 the previous year. So there's a lot of anxiety and there's a lot of exhaustion, but there's also a lot of skepticism of what a deal could entail. They do not want to give away. They want to make sure that all this fighting has been worth something, especially the Ukrainian army. When you speak to them, they said that they haven't fought so long and so hard just to give up territory that they have been trying to defend. There's also a lot of skepticism about Russian intentions, that any concessions made to Russia would just encourage Russia to rearm and come back with force. But it is worth noting that while Ukraine completely rejects legal recognition of land that Russia currently occupies, there may be some room for de facto recognition. Even after the meeting with the European leaders and the Ukrainian leader, there were comments from German Chancellor Friedrich Merz as well as France's Macron saying that Zelenskyy needs to sit in on any territorial issues. So there might be some room to negotiate that, but definitely no legal recognition coming from Ukraine.
The world will be watching this meeting very closely. So final question for both of you. Are you willing to predict what could come out of it? Lisa, let's start with you.
Well, it's always difficult to, look into the crystal ball, but my hunch is that this meeting will be used by Putin, successfully so, as a platform to show that, he can talk to what's seen by many as the most powerful man in the world, or the leader of the most powerful nation in the world, and that the two leaders will be talking about some kind of business deal, maybe a minerals deal in the Arctic. I don't think that a ceasefire will come out of this meeting right away. There might be other meetings in the near future further down the road for that.
Nimisha, what about you?
Well, the fear and the hope is that it does not end up with Trump giving away far too much and then forcing Ukraine to fall in line with that. But I do think that Trump is likely to come out with a much sunnier outlook of Putin than he has been posturing with for the last many weeks and months. And I would be very surprised to see those sanctions and consequences that Trump has been threatening for the last many months actually come through.
Lisa Louie and Nimisha Jaiswal, thank you so much.